Hey guys, if this is your first time to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Emily and today I have brought you a very special Mad Science makeup. So today's Mad Science makeup is going to be unlike any of the other ones I have done so far. I know I've done one pretty close to this video just a couple days ago, but I got this idea into my head a few nights ago and I had to make it a reality. Let's go ahead and talk about the TooFaced Life is a Festival palette. Now this palette just released pretty recently and the whole collection is unicorn themed. It's got a rainbow palette, you've got some unicorn glosses, you've got a unicorn highlight, unicorn brushes, unicorn everything. I know, we're so over it. But I really kind of paid attention to the unicorn palette. I thought that the rainbow was a really cute kind of touch to the palette, and the fact that the actual whole palette looked like a rainbow and was shaped like that. I liked the idea of it. Now in terms of the shades that Too Faced chose for the palette, there were some muted, colorful shades, but nothing really standoutish to me and nothing that really popped. I know that a lot of the colors in that palette were shimmers, and for me personally, I feel like a brand can really do eyeshadow well when they can prove that they can do a colorful matte really well. I know plenty of brands that can do colorful mattes well, and I feel like when these companies do rainbow palettes or, colorful palettes, they never really go all the way out. They kind of dip their toes into it and put some pinky shimmers in and maybe a green shimmer. If you're gonna do a colorful palette, just give me everything, Like, you might as well throw some mattes in there too, because chances are you're making a colorful look and you want some, transition shades that are going to go with the colorful shimmers that you put in. So with that being said, I was not going to purchase the palette, but I was very intrigued by the overall design of the palette. And a couple nights ago when I was organizing my collection, I came across my Anastasia Beverly Hills Nicole Guerrero Glow Kit. And I was kind of noticing the shape of the actual palette itself. It's, rectangular, it's pretty short and small, and I had an idea. So I decided to turn my Anastasia Beverly Hills Nicole Guerrero Glow Kit into the Too Faced Life is a Festival packaging palette. Now, this is a Z palette that I have created, and I have a tutorial at the end of this video showing how I have created it. It is a fully functional Z palette, so I can open it, I can move shadows around, just kind of demonstrate here on this puppy. But I have created the palette essentially, and I made this 100% myself, and I made it yesterday. And I know it's not perfect, but it's a homemade project, and I figured that I would do it for Mad Science makeup, and I think that I did okay. I'm happy with it. There were times when I struggled and was frustrated, but you will see that in the tutorial, so you just wait. It's kind of comical, but I'm really happy with it. I think it's cool, and I put in some shades from my collection that I thought would go really well for the Too Faced Life is a Festival palette. I tried to pick some shades that I saw that they had in the palette, but I know that those aren't going to be very pigmented and they're not going to be very colorful, so I chose out some ones that I think would be impactful and that I thought would just look good in this palette. I wanted to make the rainbow shape. I had to fill this palette up as soon as I made it, but it is a magnetic palette and it does function as a Z palette. And I'm sorry if that's blinding you there. This is a shiny material on the front, so, trying not to blind you. But let's go ahead and get into the shades that I chose to kind of dupe out the Too Faced palette. First one that I have over in the corner here at the start of the rainbow is Coastal Scents White Silver. It's just a white, super shimmery, silvery color. You can use it as an inner corner highlight, a brow bone highlight, all over the lid. You can do whatever you want with it, really. The second one that I have over here for you is Tiki by Colourpop. This one was in my Maybelline Lemonade Craze palette, and it's just a really nice, kind of deeper toned, bright yellow. It's not quite mustard, it is still the primary yellow color, but it's a little bit deeper in tone, and I think it works really well as a transition. The third one we have over here is Blushed by Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is a shimmer shade, but it's actually a duochrome, and it's a rosy pink with a purpley bluish duochrome, and I will show you guys that in the swatches later. But in the palette itself, it did have some duochrome, so I did want to include some as well. I don't have a whole lot of duochromes in my collection, but I tried to pick out some of the ones that I had, lying around. This one right in the center here is Cannonball by Colourpop. It is one of their pressed pigments, so it's very, very pigmented. And it is like a burnt bright orange. It's not quite a burnt orange because it doesn't really have the brownie undertone that most burnt oranges have. It's definitely still orange, but it's a little bit deeper in tone than, say, like a neon orange or, you know, something a lot, you know, more impactful and brighter and more of a like mango-y color. This one is more of a toasted orange shade. Pink that I have over here in the corner is Krissanna and Cosmetics, and this is Eros. This is a shimmery magenta hot pink with some purple reflex in it. Purple shade up in the corner here is La Di Da by Looxi Cosmetics. This is one of the best purples I've come across. It is very, very bright while still being very blendable, which is surprising for a purple. I am really impressed with the Looxi shadows so far, and you know, I haven't tried a bunch of them, but all the ones that I've tried, I've been pleased with. I saw that there was a purple in the palette, but it didn't look like any sort of bright purple. I'm sure once you start actually blending that on the eyes, it would just become completely muted, and I don't have hope for that purple in that palette. I don't, I'm sorry. This little guy over here is actually from the Element of Suprise palette by Colourpop. I had to put this guy in here because I saw almost an exact dupe in the Too Faced palette, and this one has a hot kind of corally, like pinky base, and it has a sort of purple and green duochrome flip to it, and you will see that in the swatches. There's a specific shade in the TooFaced Life Festival palette that is almost identical to this, so I had to put it in. And last but not least, the blue shade in the corner over here is Island Breeze by Coastal Scents. I have used this in a Mad Science makeup before, and it is a shimmery, like tealish blue color. If you're wondering what's in the center of the palette, I had to pay homage to, you know, the palette that I sacrificed for this science experiment. I put in one of the shades from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Nicole Guerrero Glow Kit. I believe this one is Glow Getter, but if it's not, I will put it up on the screen. But I had to put him in there. You know, I ruined his home, and I completely destroyed it and turned it into something else. So I had to put him in there just out of respect. So I'm going to go ahead and get into some swatches here of the colors that I chose to dupe out the Too Faced Life is a Festival palette. As you can see, all of the shades that I have chosen are very true to color in the pan, and they're also very pigmented and colorful. I saw a couple of reviews on the Life is a Festival palette, and it just seemed like they weren't very, you know, pigmented, and when you actually got them on the eyes, they were very muted. So I wanted to really choose some standout shades that could hold their own once you start blending everything in the crease. You would still be able to see that color, because I feel like the Too Faced palette didn't really have that quality, and I wanted to kind of one-up it, if you will. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the tutorial of how I made this palette. Now, keep in mind, this was my first time ever making anything like this ever in my entire life. I don't do arts and crafts. I don't do anything like this, so I wanted to step outside the box and do something different. I'm sorry it's not perfect, but I really did give it my all, and I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial, so let's go ahead and get right into that. Okay guys, so I'm going to go ahead and get into how I actually created the palette itself. So I have a piece of printer paper here that I have printed a rainbow out onto. I just googled pastel rainbow and printed out the full size of the rainbow onto. And this is a shiny piece of printer paper that you would use to usually print out a photo that you're going to put in a frame or something like that. It's not just the basic, you know, white cardstock. If you see my hands moving here, it's because I was talking at first, and then I ended up with 3 hours of audio and footage. Yes, it took me 3 hours to do this entire project. But I decided to just scrap the original audio and just go with something a little bit more simple and easy. So as you can see here, I'm showing you guys the shades in the palette, and if it looks a little janky around the edges, that's because earlier today, this day that I did this video, I had depotted everything and just kept it in the, you know, slots themselves. So you are going to want to depot any shadows or highlights that you have in your palette, because they will get destroyed if you do not do that. Then we have a pen to draw out the outline of where we're going to be cutting later. We have a box cutter or some sort of knife. an X-Acto blade, something of that sort. So you just want to make sure that you are using safety and be very, very careful when you are cutting. Always cut away from yourself and cut slowly. Then we're going to have some scissors. I have these little tiny scissors, but I brought in some bigger ones later. I have some holographic paper that I got from Michael's. This was $1.99, so it's not very expensive at all. It's in the scrapbooking and stationery section of Michael's. Then I have a just normal piece of paper with the rainbow on it that I used to put on the back of the palette, but you don't see that in the end because it's just the back of the palette. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted it to be one uniform thing, so I didn't even print that on the nice shiny paper. I printed it on the regular paper because I didn't want to waste a shiny piece of paper because they're expensive, my friends, let me tell you. I also have some glue in the background that I failed to show, but it's just some tacky glue. So then as you can see, I've went ahead and taken out all of my highlighters and the palette is completely empty. Now I'm going to pick up my piece of paper with the rainbow on it. This is the paper that's the shiny cardstock, and we're going to start cutting out along the edges of where the rainbow is. As you can see, I'm leaving that little white spot. I'm not cutting out the complete arch. I'm basically just cutting out a half circle shape, because in the Too Faced palette they actually leave that little empty space, if you will, there, and they put some holographic paper over it later on. But I decided to just leave it completely blank because I wanted holographic stars to go across the bottom of the palette, which you will see later. Here I'm just trimming along the edges. I'm doing kind of short, like cutting motions, because I wanted everything to be really, really as close to perfect as it could be, but it's not quite perfect. I mean, I'm using my hand, and I'm a person who has a very shaky hand. I don't have a very steady hand, so I really wanted to take my time with cutting everything out. So that's the key with this project, is just take your time and don't rush it, because it's a lot of slow movements because we are doing this by hand. I guess if you wanted to, you could use like a stencil or like a protractor or something that has a similar shape, but I was just freehanding it because, I don't know, I didn't think about a stencil until right now. So now you see me finishing up the cutting process, and I'm just kind of trimming it very slowly and making sure that I get all the way to the end of the paper. Now I have placed my rainbow on the top of the palette. I have touched the rainbow to the seam of the palette there, and I put my tacky glue on top of it just to hold it down as a weight, because we're going to be tracing out the shape of the rainbow on the palette. So I wanted to put the tacky glue there because, you know, that rainbow could go flying if my hand slips while I'm tracing the palette. So basically I'm just tracing it right on to the palette itself, and I'm doing that on both sides. Now you see me take my box cutter, and I'm slowly and carefully using firm pressure and pushing down onto the cardboard material. So now I am grabbing my scissors and I'm just going to start cutting along the line. Now this was pretty easy for me because this particular cardboard is pretty thin compared to the underside of the palette. So now you're seeing me take my scissors and cut along the lines. This was easy for me to do because this top piece of the packaging is very thin and the cardboard isn't very strong. So it was easy for me to do this. Later, when I do the bottom part of the palette, I'm using a different technique because that cardboard was very thick. So we had to bust out the big guns for that one. So here is where I ran into a bit of a dilemma. So as you can see, I have everything cut out here. I went ahead and cut those two little flaps away from the palette. What ended up happening is that the cardboard that was holding the top part of the palette to the bottom part was extremely thin, especially when we took away a big piece of the seam that was really holding it together. So the top of my palette actually popped off. And this is where I got really frustrated and I almost quit this entire project. But I persevered. I was gonna make this happen. So I actually took some super glue and I put some super glue on the holographic paper and attached it to the seam where the front part of the palette had snapped off. I made sure to leave a little bit of extra room in between the seam and the holographic paper so that when I attached the front part of the palette, there was enough material from the holographic paper to attach everything together. And I went ahead and put some more super glue on that little piece that was still hanging up, and I basically just pushed the front of the palette onto that, held it for about 20 seconds until it was completely dry, and then I repeated the same steps on the front of the palette. It actually worked. I was extremely surprised. I did not think that was going to work even in the slightest. I thought I was done for. I'm gonna be completely honest. So now that I have my arch shape cut out on the front of the palette and I have my seam glued back together, I'm actually taking a nail file and I'm basically sanding the sides of my palette to get rid of any scragglies or any little pieces that are kind of sticking up from the cardboard. And I'm just using it along the edges. So now I'm taking my box cutter and we're gonna start working on the bottom of the palette. So I'm basically holding the top part of the palette down and using it as a stencil to get the shape of the arch on the lower part of the palette. So I'm taking my box cutter and I'm just cutting along the lines. Once I have my stencil outlined on the bottom part of the palette, I can go ahead and lift up the top portion of it and start working on the bottom here. So I'm just doing the same thing, repeating the same steps on the bottom, and I'm making sure that I cut through the layer of foam as well as the layer where the pans used to be. So it's kind of two different surfaces that you have to cut over. There is no foam where the pans used to be, so you have to cut through the foam, and then once you get to where the pans were, you have to just start cutting through the cardboard. So on the bottom part of the palette, it's designed to keep the highlighter shades nice and insulated and cozy in their homes in there, so there's a couple layers of cardboard on the actual palette itself. So I'm taking my box cutter and I'm going over the lines that I've already done, and each time I go over each of my kind of arch lines, if you will, I'm using a decent amount of force to make sure that I'm able to get through a different layer every time I go over it again. Now I'm flipping over the palette and I'm actually going to hold my rainbow up to it again and trace over it just like I did with the front part of the palette. And we're gonna just basically outline the arches and then take our box cutter and do the same exact thing that we did with the front side. Just basically cut through it with the box cutter, make sure that you're being super careful with that guy. And then we're essentially gonna do the same thing that we did with the front side of the palette. We're going to be just breaking off those flaps that are at the top there. And do not throw those away because we are going to be using the foam from those very shortly. I've also started to cut out of the actual foam itself, and I'm cutting out about a 1-centimeter wide border to be the border of the Z palette. So now that we have removed the flaps from the top of the palette to create the arch shape, there is some negative space when you close the palette from where the pans were and where there's no foam. So I'm actually just taking the foam from the little flaps that we cut off, and I'm just cutting them to size and cutting them into a nice arch shape that goes along with the rest of the palette. It's basically just trial and error from here. I'm just kind of eyeballing it and trimming it as needed. Once I have it to the size that I need it, I'm going ahead and gluing everything in and making sure that it is nice and lined up with everything. And if it's not, then I can just trim off any excess material. Now I'm taking my box cutter and just cutting out the rest of my border. And then I'm going to be taking my scissors and basically just popping them underneath where the pans were to get right underneath the foam. And I'm basically going to be just prying up the foam. It also helps to cut some slits in between where the pans and the foam are. It just helps to kind of pry everything out. You basically just want to remove that inside portion of the foam because we are making this a nice big open Z palette. Once I have that, you can see the general shape of what we're working with here. And I actually took a magnetic strip from a different Anastasia Beverly Hills glow kit because I didn't have any magnetic strips on me. You can buy some sticky magnetic strips from Michael's for about $2, sometimes $3 depending on where you go. And it's essentially the same thing that is in the glow kit. Now I'm going to be cutting the magnetic strip to fit inside the pan. Now I'm going to use the bulk of the strip to really fill up as much as I can. And then from there, I'm going to be just kind of eyeballing and cutting some strips to size that I think would fit in the remaining spaces. I think I cut about 4 or 5 little strips in there, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect. We're going to be covering this with all of the holographic paper anyway. And then I'm just going to glue everything in once I think that I have enough of the surface of our Z palette covered with the magnetic strip material. Then from there, off camera, I cut out a half circle shape of my holographic paper, as well as some strips of holographic paper that I thought would fit the border of the Z palette. So I went ahead and just popped in the half circle shape that I cut out of the hollow paper and then trimmed it as needed. I made sure to cut the hollow paper a little bit bigger than the shape of the palette, and you can just trim it as needed. Just kind of place it in the palette, see what needs to be cut off, and just kind of trim it as you go. And you can do the same things with the border of the Z palette. I just kind of cut out a few strips. Basically, I cut it into 3 different strips. I have one for half of the arch of the palette, I have another for the other half of the arch, and then I have one long piece for the very bottom of the palette. and I cut those a little bit bigger to begin with and then just trimmed them as needed. I'm gonna glue everything into place and make sure that I've cleaned up my glue. And then we have the inside of the palette basically done. I can trim off any weird edges as needed, and I can use my nail file as, sandpaper if needed, but it's basically good to go. Then I'm gonna go ahead and put some glue on the front of the palette. I'm just putting it on the border because I don't want there to be any glue bubbles underneath of our rainbow once we actually put it on. Then I'm going to grab my cutout of the rainbow and basically just put it on as evenly as I can, lining the top of the rainbow up with the seam. Just smooth it out with my fingers and make sure that there's no big bubbles of glue or any gloppy pieces of glue in there. And then that's basically it with the palette. I went ahead and just cut out some holographic stars. Didn't use a stencil or anything. I freehanded it. And my boyfriend had to help me because apparently I'm not very good at drawing stars. Literally every star that I drew ended up looking like Patrick Star from SpongeBob, not like a nice, crisp, pretty star. So he had to come in and rescue the day for me and drew out some nice stars for me. So I just cut out about 15 of them and glued them all along the edge of the palette here where you see that there's that negative space. I just filled it up with the stars. I put 4 on the actual rainbow itself because I wanted to replicate what TooFaced had going on with some of these stars on the actual rainbow. And that's basically the last step to the palette, and our palette should be done. So there you have it, guys. There is my Z palette based off of the TooFaced Life is a Festival palette. I'm going to go ahead and pop up some comparisons of the inside and outside of my palette versus the TooFaced Life is a Festival palette, just so you guys can see what I got really similar and what I kind of shied away from as far as the color shades go and the overall design. I had a lot of fun creating this. There were some frustrating parts where I was not sure if I was even going to be able to do this. As soon as I started getting into cutting the thick cardboard, I almost gave up and scrapped the whole idea, but I really wanted to push through it because I am kind of a lazy person and I will start projects and never actually go through with it. So I wanted to create something good and, do my absolute best to bring something cool to you guys. I don't know, I've never seen anyone do something like this on YouTube before, and I really wanted to do something really unique and something exciting and entertaining for you guys to watch. I had a lot of fun creating it in the end. So with that being said, there's another release that has come out recently, and I'm not going to name it, but I'm sure you guys can guess because it's in the same realm, if you will, as the, unicorn theme and the other theme that is very overdone and redundant in the beauty community. But I may or may not be working on a design of a palette that's very similar to a certain palette that came out recently. I don't know. You'll just have to wait and see. I do hope that you consider subscribing. I have all sorts of makeup stuff happening here on this channel, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below to figure out what palette I'm going to be working on next here on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you are having an absolutely awesome day wherever you are, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!